Hi Artisans of Light, it's time for another skills challenge. I've been tagged with doing some things with Flash, so we're going to start with Flash. Flash is a big subject and we're going to eat this elephant one bite at a time. The first thing that we're going to talk about is one of the key things that's very counterintuitive, or at least it was to me when I started with Flash. When I started with Flash, it occurred to me that if a photographer says I'm a natural light photographer, or I only deal with natural light, what they mean is Flash scares the poo out of me, or I don't know how to use Flash. And what I found is if I want to take senior pictures, or I want to take engagement pictures, or I want to take pictures hither, thither, or yon, I'm no longer dependent on making sure that the light is good, or that I have to carry a reflector, or that I have to do this or that or something else. If I can control the flash, if I can control the light, then I can do things with the light, and that's very important to me. That's why I started trying to find out about Flash. I watched a bunch of videos, learned a bunch of stuff, knew it here, but didn't know how to do it with my hands. And one of the things that I found is that when I started doing Flash, it ate me alive. I got a bunch of really odd things happening and I couldn't control any of it. So this skills challenge is going to be about what you need to do to start learning how to use Flash. And since I'm the one teaching it, we're going to start with where I think you should learn to use Flash, which has to do with Flash distance to subject. It's not really intuitive the way that works. There's a thing called the inverse square law. It's time for physics, guys. Anytime that there's a propagation of energy in a three-dimensional space, that energy decreases by an inverse square. In other words, if the distance from flash to subject doubles, the amount of light is reduced to a fourth. Think about that. If you double the distance, the amount of energy or light that hits your subject is 1/4. So what that meant for me is when I'd get the flash set up and I'd start horsing the flash around, and I'd move it here, move it there, move it here, move it there. I'd move it back some and it'd get really dark, or I'd move it up some and the civil defense sirens would go off because it looked like I nuked my subject. Imagine, if you will, that I was on a dark desert highway with a cool wind in my hair and a car came around a curve a mile away. I could see the car because I could see the headlights. The car couldn't see me with those headlights because of the rapid fall off that you get with light. And that's what we're going to demonstrate and talk about today. So the skills challenge is get yourself set up, on camera, flash, or off. Put your camera in manual and find a starting point to start playing with Flash, a starting set of manual settings for the camera and for the flash. In this case, my camera is set at f11, 1/25 of a second, ISO 200. So that's ISO 200, 1/25 of a second at f11. That is about the distance that I want to start with if I have my flash 3 feet from the subject, which is where I've got the flash set up behind me, is about 3 feet from where I'm going to stand. The flash is at 1/16 power. If you put all of it in manual and follow what I'm trying to teach here, that's one of the ways that you can start learning how much to move that flash to make the changes that you want to make and the exposures that you want to make. So let's take a couple of images here and we'll talk a little bit more about that theory. I'm sorry, but my camera's on a 10-second delay, so I'll have to find something to talk about while we're in here. I'm 3 feet away from the flash, and if I turn into the flash when the flash fires, I see a little blue bar in front of my eyes, but the idea here is not so much to look at the flash or the quality of the light, because I'm just using a bare flash. We'll talk about light modifiers and light quality later. All I want to do is to show you the difference between that flash at 3 feet for a proper exposure and what happens when you move the flash to 6 feet. So let's do that. This flash was 3 feet from this doorway, which is where I took the first exposure. If we move the flash back to 6 feet, and that's at about 6 feet, I'm 6 feet tall, that's about a 6-foot wingspan. If you move the flash to 6 feet, you've doubled the flash distance. In your mind, you tend to think that you're only going to get half as much light, when in fact what you're going to get is a quarter the amount of light. So, let's start it again. Here again, we're not looking at the quality of the light so much as we're looking at the exposure of the light, the flash exposure. Now, that second piece, and we'll download those images and show them to you, you would think that at that, you would be one stop off. I didn't change anything on the camera. I left it at f11. Let's take the camera, leave it at 1/25. We'll go to f8. As you know, if you move one f-stop, you've doubled the amount of light that's getting into the flash. So I've doubled the distance. I've now set the camera to f8. I should have a proper exposure in my mind. You'll find though that you don't, because since we've doubled the distance of the flash, only 1/4 as much light is reaching me in the doorway. So by changing from f11 to f8, I've doubled the amount of light that the camera is seeing. There's double amount of light going to the sensor, but I need to double it again for the proper exposure. I was at f8 or f11, I went to f8. That's one stop, that's double the amount of light. Now I've moved it another stop, gone from f8 to f5/6, which is another doubling of the light. If I've done this correctly, and I'm not going to look like a fool, this exposure with double the distance, 2 f-stops, 4 times as much light, that exposure should be the correct exposure having doubled the distance. So when you get set up and you find the one that everything's working for you from the distance that you've got, whether the camera's on the flash or not, and you move back and forth, you'll begin to see that if you want to double the amount of light, you don't double the distance. If you want to double the amount of light, you take the distance times 1.4, which it's physics again, gets you on that curve at the doubling point. So if you're at 6 feet and you want to go 1 f-stop or double the amount of light, you would change that by 0.7 of that distance. So 0.7 times 6 is 4.2 feet. So if you go from 6 feet to 4.2 feet, you've doubled the amount of light. If you go from 6 feet to 3 feet, you've increased the amount of light 4 times. Again, as you move it closer, the increments you need to pay attention to the increments. If you want to lessen the amount of light and you go from 6 feet or from 3 feet to 6 feet, if you go 3 feet to 6 feet, you've doubled that distance. You've cut the light by a factor of 4. If you want to cut the light by 1 f-stop, if you're a little hot and you want to back up, don't double that distance, take the distance and multiply it times 1.4. There's the physics again. So from 3 feet, 1.4 is 1.2 feet, so 4.2 feet. You'd go from 3 feet to 4.2 feet to reduce the exposure by 1 stop. So there's the challenge for you. Get set up, get your camera on manual. If you're about 3 feet away from your subject, I would recommend that you try ISO 200 f11 at a 1/25 of a second. Put the flash power on about a 1/16. The kind of flash you have will kind of dictate that. Get an exposure that you like, and then move the flash. Don't change any of the numbers, but move the flash. Double the distance, halve the distance, move it a little bit here, a little bit there, and start getting a feel for how much the light source has to move from the subject to get you an effective exposure. I think you'll find that if you do that and you spend some time taking this challenge and making those changes, that you'll start to get a feel for what you do with the light, and the other things that we talk about as we go forward will be a little easier. So that's the challenge. Set it up on manual, play with it, look at the distance, look at the exposures, and see what you can learn. More later.